Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. says it has attacked and seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship near the Strait of Hormuz that tried to get around a naval blockade. Meanwhile, President Trump said U.S. negotiators will be in Pakistan on Monday for another round of negotiations with Iran. But Iran's state media has said no such meeting in Pakistan has been confirmed, adding that it will not join talks with the United States while a naval blockade remains in place. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung is currently in New Delhi and is set to hold talks with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi later in the day. The two sides are expected to focus on energy supply chains, AI, and defense. With just a couple of days remaining the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, U.S. forces seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman. But the U.S. claims the talks aren't over as a delegation will be in Islamabad on Monday night for another round of negotiations. Our Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
Motor vessel Toska, vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
That was the sound of the U.S. Navy intercepting the Iranian-flagged cargo ship Toska in the Gulf of Oman. In a post on Truth Social, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed on Sunday that U.S. forces had seized the 900-foot vessel after it ignored warnings and attempted to breach the U.S. naval blockade. The incident comes just days before the fragile 2-week ceasefire between Washington and Tehran is set to expire this Wednesday. President Trump also used Truth Social to ramp up the pressure, threatening to destroy Iranian power plants and bridges if Tehran rejects what he called a fair deal. He also said that a U.S. delegation is currently en route to Islamabad, Pakistan, and is expected to arrive on Monday evening to resume negotiations. However, Tehran is refusing to participate. Iranian state media reports there is no clear prospect for talks. Iran insists that as long as the U.S. blockade continues, its delegation will not attend, labeling Washington's demands excessive. The diplomatic deadlock is severely disrupting global supply chains and energy markets. Iran has reversed course and effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, declaring that any crossing will now be considered cooperation with the enemy. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has fired warning shots at several vessels, forcing ships from France, India, Botswana, and Angola to turn back over the weekend. With the ceasefire deadline looming on Wednesday, the standoff shows no signs of easing. U.S. officials state that all military and diplomatic options remain on the table. However, with Washington demanding an end to maritime attacks and Tehran insisting the naval blockade must be lifted first, there appears little room for a breakthrough before the ceasefire's expiration date. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
So Iran says it will not join talks with the United States in Pakistan while a naval blockade remains in place, despite ongoing indirect exchanges through a mediator. Tehran also condemned the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports and said the Strait of Hormuz is closed again. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Iran says it will not send a negotiating delegation to Pakistan for talks with the United States, insisting discussions cannot move forward while a U.S. naval blockade remains in place. That's according to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency on Sunday, which added indirect exchanges between Tehran and Washington have continued in recent days through a Pakistani intermediary, following an initial round of negotiations last weekend. The news outlet described the latest contacts as a continuation of that same diplomatic process. However, Iranian officials have made their position clear. As long as U.S. President Donald Trump remains a blockade of Iranian ports, formal negotiations will not take place. On the U.S. side, a White House official says Vice President J.D. Vance, along with envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are expected to travel to Islamabad for talks. President Trump also told Fox News that meetings are scheduled for Tuesday, with the possibility of extending into Wednesday. Iran's foreign ministry condemned the blockade, with spokesperson Ismail Bakai calling the move unlawful and a violation of a Pakistan-mediated ceasefire and a breach of international law, including provisions of the UN Charter. In a statement posted on social media on Sunday, he described the blockade as an act of aggression and accused the United States of imposing collective punishment on the Iranian population. The naval arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said Saturday that it's closing the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz, following through on earlier warnings after the U.S. maintained its blockade. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung is currently in India. He will sit down with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi today to discuss cooperation on issues such as energy amid the Middle East conflict. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jang-min joins us live from New Delhi. So, Jang-min, what can we expect from the summit?
Hi, Angie. A host of issues will be on the table, including supply chains, AI, and the defense industry. President Lee and Prime Minister Modi are also expected to focus on the Korea-India special strategic partnership. They could also discuss the bilateral trade pact as negotiations are in the works to upgrade the pact, aiming to expand trade volume to $50 billion by 2030. People-to-people exchanges and cultural cooperation are also high on the agenda. Take a look at what the president had to say.
인도는 단순한 소비 시장이 아니라 이제는 글로벌 생산과 공급망을 이끄는 핵심 국가가 되었습니다. 그리고 앞으로 더욱 성장할 것입니다. 중동 전쟁의 여파 속에서 공급망 불안정과 글로벌 경제 위기가 상시화되고 있기 때문에 한국과 인도는 서로에게 가장 중요한 전략적 파트너가 될 것입니다.
President Lee added that he sees a great opportunity for the Korea-India relationship to be upgraded to a new level. South Korean officials see India as a key partner in the global south at a crucial time.
As a leading country in the global south and a fast-growing country, India is a key partner as we extend our pragmatic diplomacy centered on the national interest.
The summit will begin with a welcoming ceremony, expanded talks, an exchange of MOUs, and a joint press conference. President Lee will also lay a wreath at a Mahatma Gandhi memorial in Delhi before the summit. Lee will be hosted by Modi for lunch. Blue House officials expect the visit will not only help strengthen the partnership, but also the personal bond between two leaders. Last year, they met on the sidelines of the G7 and G20 summits.
Right, and Jang-min, I hear the president will meet with business leaders later in the day, right?
You're right, Angie. So they will explore ways to seek areas of cooperation that are mutually beneficial. A business delegation is accompanying President Lee on this trip, including Samsung Electronics Chairman Lee Jae-yong and Hyundai Motor Group Chairman Chung Hui-sun. India is a large market with a population of more than 1.4 billion people and is a major global economic power. Later in the evening, President Lee will be hosted by Indian President Draupadi Murmu, the ceremonial head of state, for a state dinner. President Lee arrived in New Delhi yesterday for a 3-day state visit. It's the first time in 8 years that a South Korean president has visited India. Unji.
All right, thank you for that, Jang-min. President Lee Jae-myung has also promised more support for overseas Koreans to ensure a better environment for them. Meeting South Koreans residing in India on Sunday, the president appreciated the Korean community for its role in strengthening the South Korea-India bilateral relationship. He noted the hardship and dedication of the first members of India's Korean community after dozens of people fled the peninsula after the Korean War and settled in India in the 1950s. He added that the community shows what the Korean peninsula has to pursue in the future, namely peace and prosperity, and that people from both South and North Korea live peacefully together. So South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung is in New Delhi to hold a summit with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi before heading to Vietnam on Tuesday. For more, we're joined today by Professor Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Connolly, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning.
So this visit marks the first state visit to India by a Korean president in 8 years, right? In the context of Global South diplomacy, why are India and Vietnam being prioritized as the twin pillars of Korea's current foreign policy?
I think South Korea is prioritizing these countries for several reasons. First, we have to remember from a historical perspective, President Moon's New Southern Policy, Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy, both generally centered on ASEAN and Southeast Asia as a key area for Korean policy. And I think although names and terminology changes, South Korea's advanced technology, its need to produce electronics, make the region, which is rich in natural resources and fairly cheap labor, a very natural target for South Korea's policymakers. And I would say this move to Southeast Asia was part of a general shift away from the Chinese market, which the US has always supported. But I would say today's prioritization of this relationship with India and Vietnam are also being driven by an unspoken need to de-risk away from the US market. Under President Trump, the United States has become very predatory. So creating deeper economic relationships with the global South is a good way for South Korea to insulate itself from both Chinese and US economic coercion. And I would say if we look at it from this perspective, there's a big difference between earlier Indo-Pacific strategy, which kind of sees a liberal world order led by the United States, and today's much more pragmatic global South diplomacy, which is admitting that a multipolar world exists and Korea has to find its place in it.
Right, and the Blue House has said these summits will focus on energy supply chain stability, especially with the ongoing situation in the Middle East. So realistically, how much can strengthening ties with India and Vietnam sort of insulate the Korean economy from global shocks?
Frankly, probably not a lot. I would say all three countries are in a very similar boat. They're all high energy consumers, not producers. South Korea and India are both very major refiners of petroleum, but they're not actual, producers of petroleum itself. So I would say this is basically a meeting of victims of the US war in Iran and the Iranian blockade of Hormuz. So at best, they're going to exchange some information on energy supply chains, maybe aligning policies, but there's not really a lot they can do. And maybe adaptation is the best we can hope for, because these countries are in a similar situation and can maybe teach each other what they've been doing.
I see. And we are seeing a significant economic delegation accompanying President Lee on this trip, including the heads of companies like Samsung, SK, Hyundai, and LG. And while Samsung and LG are looking at both nations, Hyundai is focusing heavily on India and SK on Vietnam's energy sector. So what does this sort of divided strategy tell us about how the Korean industry views the different roles India and Vietnam play?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think broadly what we're witnessing here is maybe a growing evolution and sophistication of how Korean companies approach the region. I would say in the past, South Korea prioritized Western, US and European markets, and they saw Southeast Asia and places like India as a source of maybe labor and resources. But these regions today are the source of a huge growing middle class of consumers. India has a vast population. Vietnam has a large growing middle class. So I think right now what's happening is, unlike the past where Korean companies prioritize China for production chains, United States for consumers, I would say that Southeast Asia and India today is perhaps becoming a source of both new production chains and new markets. And I think this complexity explains the diverse ways that Korean companies are approaching the region. And it's not just production anymore, but also co-production with local partners, because let's be honest, both India and Vietnam have strong governments that want to also expand their own indigenous manufacturing sectors.
Right. And after he wraps up his trip to India, President Lee Jae-myung will be heading to Vietnam. He will be the first state guest for Vietnam's newly appointed leadership. Beyond the focus on minerals, what's the symbolic importance of the timing, and how does it solidify Korea's position as sort of a top-tier partner to Vietnam?
Right, absolutely. To Lam, he just got back from a visit to Beijing. So, President Lee is the second leader he's having a one-on-one summit with since his selection as president. Korea is clearly a very favored partner of Vietnam. The meeting they're going to have is probably going to focus on energy security, rail, urban projects, and I would say high-tech cooperation. And it's very important to remember just how important Vietnam is for South Korea as well. It's one of the largest trade surpluses with Vietnam, second only to the United States. And I think this is a really important sign, not only of South Korea diversifying away from the U.S. market and for exports, but also Vietnam's perspective. We're in a world where hegemons, the United States and China, are becoming much more predatory. So countries in the global south like Vietnam, I suggest they see a greater value in cooperating with South Korea because this cooperation can be much more equal and much less hierarchical. And I think the pragmatic diplomacy of President Lee is very well suited to take advantage of this opportunity.
I see. All right, Professor Connolly, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
President Lee Jae-myung has also vowed stronger support for those who fought for South Korea's democratization.
국민 주권 정부는 지금 우리가 누리는 자유와 번영, 평화의 토대에 공동체를 위한 특별한 희생과 헌신이 굳건히 자리 잡고 있음을 결코 잃지 않을 것입니다.
Speaking at a ceremony marking the 66th anniversary of the April 19th revolution on Sunday, Lee said the government will seek to identify and honor more individuals who contributed to the country's democratic movement. He also pledged to expand medical support for them. The April 19th revolution refers to a mass pro-democracy movement in 1960 against election fraud orchestrated under then-President Lee Seung-man to prolong his hold on power. The protests, which left more than 180 civilians dead, ultimately led to Lee's resignation. And North Korea said Monday that it has test-fired a Hwasong-11 Ra surface-to-surface tactical ballistic missile to evaluate its warhead capability, watched on by leader Kim Jong-un. Now, that's according to a report by the North Korean Central News Agency a day after South Korea's military detected multiple short-range ballistic missiles fired from the East Sea from the Sinpo area early Sunday morning. Kim reportedly expressed great satisfaction, saying the test marked meaningful progress in boosting both high-density and high-precision strike capabilities. On the National Day for the Abolition of Disability Discrimination, we take a closer look at a company redefining employment for people with developmental disabilities by creating a truly inclusive workspace. Our Cho Young-eun files this report.
One employee steps forward to explain how they use an online system to track their daily routines, independently managing their attendance. Soon after, workers move into their respective sectors, receiving clear safety and logistic instructions. Each employee is provided with customized maps featuring photos and simple diagrams. They use their outstanding skills to memorize subway maps to do delivery services by subway. As they pack their assigned cookies and bread into delivery boxes, they head out with a sense of purpose to complete the day's tasks.
When we go out together, the day feels really enjoyable. I'm grateful that this place has allowed me to keep going for 10 years. I'm thankful I've been able to work here for so long.
At this workplace, tasks are carefully redesigned to match individual abilities, allowing employees with developmental disabilities to work efficiently. Tasks such as cutting packaging, assembling boxes, and preparing goods are broken down into clear and manageable steps. Customized tools such as acrylic cutting frames for trimming flowers have been developed based on employee feedback.
I started working here through a recommendation from my school teacher. It's very fun, active, and I really like it. I've been here for about 2 years. I want to keep working hard here for 10 or even 20 years.
In Korea, companies are required to hire a certain portion of people with disabilities. Yet only 30.5% of people with developmental disabilities were employed as of June 2024. At this company, more than 80% of employees have disabilities, and it works with other organizations through Korea's indirect employment support system.
If jobs and environments are well designed to fit people with developmental disabilities, and if they are supported by understanding colleagues, more opportunities can be created, allowing them to grow and achieve results alongside us as members of society.
By transforming employment into one of collaboration and workplace accommodation, this presents a new standard for businesses and a more inclusive society. 조영은, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In the U.S., a gunman in Shreveport, Louisiana, has shot and killed 8 children. Police say the suspect opened fire across 3 separate residences just after 6 a.m. Sunday in a domestic disturbance. He then carjacked a vehicle and fled before police shot and killed him during the chase. The children killed were aged between 1 and 14 years old, and some of the children were related to the shooter. Shreveport City's mayor called it the worst tragedy the city has ever seen. A Russian-born man opened fire on pedestrians with an automatic rifle in Kyiv on Saturday, killing 6 people and wounding 14. The shooter then barricaded himself in a supermarket with hostages, where police shot him dead after a 40-minute standoff. 8 people remain in hospital on Sunday, including a child whose both parents were killed in the shooting. Footage from the incident showed police officers running away from the shooter, causing the head of Ukraine's patrol police to resign in disgrace. Ukraine's interior minister said the attacker's mental state was clearly unstable and called for a full investigation. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani and New York Governor Kathy Hochul on Wednesday jointly proposed a new annual surcharge on second homes in the city worth more than $5 million. The measure, targeting roughly 13,000 properties, is expected to generate $500 million a year to help close a projected $5.4 billion budget gap. Mamdani called it a, quote, important step, pointing to properties including the $238 million Central Park penthouse owned by Citadel founder Ken Griffin as examples of ultra-luxury real estate sitting largely empty while average New Yorkers struggle with affordability. Pro-Russian former President Rumen Radev scored a landslide victory in Bulgaria's election on Sunday, with exit polls showing his Progressive Bulgaria party taking 44% of the vote. The conservative Gerb party took 12.5% of the votes in a result that could reshape the EU members' foreign policy. Radev, a Eurosceptic former fighter pilot who opposes military support for Ukraine, has called for resuming the flow of Russian oil and gas into Europe and has rode a wave of public anger over corruption, political instability, and the rising cost of living since Bulgaria adopted the euro in January.
After yesterday's record-breaking early summer warmth in Seoul, today should feel much cooler. Today also marks Kogu on Korea's seasonal calendar that signals spring rain, nourishing the crops. And we'll see showers in many parts of the country, while temperatures will finally ease back to where they should be for late April. And about the rain, most of the country will see around 5 millimeters of rainfall today, but this could be mixed with dust today. So once the rain moves out, the air quality takes a turn. Yellow dust arriving on northwesterly winds will push pollution levels bad to very bad nationwide. Tomorrow looks like it's going to be even worse. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 19 degrees Celsius. Daegu will get up to 23 degrees. Try to avoid being outdoors tomorrow. Dust levels will be very bad nationwide. Then another round of rain is likely for southern regions and Jeju on Thursday.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.